Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So, today's guest is a gentleman that recently spent a week with over in Ojai, California. We're part of a mastermind of curated entrepreneurs that get together once, sometimes twice a year, where we take off our masks, share ideas, inspirations, and so forth. The group of people there doing anywhere from a few million a year all the way up to several $100 million a year. In fact, one particular gentleman told me he estimated to hit sales of $1 billion in the next few years. So, quite a diverse group of thought leaders, really inspirational. Now, today's guest, we talked quite a few times, and then I was lucky enough to share a ride with him on the way to the airport. And as we were in the car, I said to myself, my God, I got to get him in on the podcast. And I really wished I pulled up my phone and hit record so you could have been a part of the conversations that we had. So, fortunately, today, now you get to be part of that conversation. So, my guest was one of the original buy a business experts. He wrote this book called Buy Then Build. Buy Then Build hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. It also hit the USA Today bestseller list and has been on Amazon's bestseller list for the past 5 years and counting. He's an entrepreneur, an investor who co-founded 3 startups. He acquired 7 companies and consulted or participated in way over 100 different business transactions. In fact, by this point, it's probably several hundred. After the success of Buy Then Build, he started an elite accelerator for acquisition entrepreneurs called the Acquisition Lab. Holds an MBA from the Olin School of Business, received the Declaration of Accomplishment and Entrepreneurship from the Scandalar Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So we should probably let people know who you are, right? Walker Deibel. So why don't we open up the conversation by talking about why one should consider buying a business as a way to grow their companies?
Here's the thing. I think that the big resounding point that I was trying to scream through my megaphone when I wrote Buy Then Build, I felt like I needed entrepreneurs to kind of wake up to the fact that acquisition is equally as important as innovation. Okay. And so when we're thinking about growing organically, we're thinking about all the things that you just mentioned, right? It's like we're either growing at 20% a year over year or more, or we're thinking to ourselves, how are we adding new products? How are we expanding? How are we doing all these things? If you have a unique opportunity to, continue to push the bar in terms of innovation in your industry, I don't know that you should distract yourself with acquisition. Okay. But if you're not getting that 20%, year over year growth, you need to be figuring out how exactly you're going to grow. Okay. And the thing is that acquisition provides the single fastest way to grow compared to really anything else. And the concept is really pretty simple. It's kind of a money ball for entrepreneurship, right? So in other words, when you start a business, most of us, we put money in or we raise money in order to build some kind of infrastructure. That's what the money's trying to do, right? And you're not really, in my opinion, successful until the revenue exceeds the cost of the infrastructure, meaning you have positive earnings. Okay. If you don't have positive earnings, you are not sustainable. Okay.
Right.
The thing is that when you buy an existing business, you're sort of reversing the equation. You're starting with revenue. You're starting with a profitable company. You're starting with infrastructure, human knowledge, customers, right? And all the rest of it. And I decided to go out and try to buy a company. And I figured that, these companies, they trade at low multiples. Number two, because you often are targeting companies with decades of history, decades of profitability, you can go to a bank and get a loan in order to buy these companies, right? And in 2016, the SBA came out and said, look, even if there's no collateral, there's no, equipment or whatever, we'll give you up to 90% of the transaction price, up to $5 million. dollars. Okay. So you can buy businesses, so you can get access to capital faster. You can buy infrastructure immediately. And when I say immediately, I mean, it's like if you have an existing business and you're trying to grow through acquisition, you've got a clear direction of what you're trying to acquire, right? And so the thing is, you can go find that infrastructure and then buy it with a bank loan, and you can grow your business. You just add that revenue to your company on that day.
You know, one of the things that I love most about acquisitions is that, metaphorically speaking, it's very similar to real estate, the way they analyze real estate, right? So you look at a property, multifamily or a commercial property, you say, okay, what is the income that this property is bringing in? And then what are all my expenses? And then you factor in, okay, if I'm going to take a loan on this piece of property, what is going to be my debt load? Because I want to make sure at the end of the day that there is some money left over. Now, the big difference between a commercial or residential property, if you have a big property, then they're planning on a manager. So there'll be money set aside for a manager at some point. But if you have a smaller property, there's really not a lot of money left over for management. But when you buy a business, it's different. When you buy a business, you're looking at, okay, what is all the revenue that's coming in? And when you put all your expenses in there and then you factor in your debt load, you also have to factor in the executive management and a little bit of profit. And so when you buy a business, you're automatically buying a vehicle that's providing you with income on day one. And a lot of people don't recognize that your risk when buying a business is actually substantially lower. If you buy a business for, say, $5 million, your risk isn't really $5 million because you will be, or you should be, if you did your due diligence right, you should be bringing in, revenue on an ongoing basis, plus the fact that you have basically bought yourself a salary. And so it's a really exciting way to not only boost your take home income, but also increase the growth of your business and the momentum and so forth.
I think that the analogy to real estate is obvious because it's sort of bringing those real estate economics to entrepreneurship. And you get the equity buildup, right? You get the cash flow from the building or the business paying off the loan that you took to acquire it,
Yep.
right? And then the third thing is appreciation, right? And so there's really two huge differences in terms of the economics. And I think number one is that the equity buildup in real estate might be, 3% a year. You're just sort of whatever the external market is doing and it kind of chugs along, right? With buying a business, the appreciation is how well you execute,
Yeah.
right? So, if I did it all over again, I'd buy a business and then I'd join your program, Charles, because you're going to push that appreciation lever and make that business worth more. And then the other thing is like when you buy a building, it's often, you look at cap rates or the way that they're sort of measured, right? If you use that same unit of measure, a cap rate for a building might be what, between 4 and 10%, depending on what you're doing. Is that about right?
Well,
When you buy a
depends on the
business,
area. Yeah.
when you buy a business, it's usually, 25 to 35% cap rate, right?
No, you're right. And I mean, there are so many different ways. For example, when you're buying real estate, you might say, okay, I'm going to change the facade. And
Yeah.
we'll add property value by changing the facade so it looks prettier from the street. Or you might say, well, the lease rates are currently at this amount, I'll increase the lease rates and go from there. Your risk is different though. Even if you own a building and let's say it's a 10 unit building and you have one person that leaves, that's automatically a 10% vacancy rate, and you have to fill that 10% vacancy rate. And if you have more people, that's a lot more vacancy, and you've got to be able to have enough capital to be able to float those expenses because you have some real expenses along the way. And so the risk profile in real estate is oftentimes higher and far more vulnerable to economic conditions. When you look at a business, the risk profile, there are ways in which you can have a much lower risk profile. You wouldn't be dealing with 10 customers. You may be dealing with thousands, or for that matter, maybe just hundreds. So if you have some attrition of a few customers here and there, it's not going to be a matter of 10% of the business automatically overnight ends up dropping. Now, when we look at evaluating a business, you pay for a business just like in real estate. What's it worth right now? But there are different factors that play into risk. If you're looking at a business, and by the way, when I say this, I also want you to think about it like when you're buying a business, but I also want you to flip it around and say, if you're looking to exit and sell your business, how is somebody going to be looking at yours? There's going to be a few different things here. So as I look to evaluate a business, I go, well, what is the scalable marketing and sales strategies that currently exist in the business? Or is it built predominantly on word of mouth and referrals? If it's built predominantly on word of mouth and referrals, from there, there's a risk for me because I know that if I'm going to buy the business, if it's based on word of mouth and referrals, well, the founder eventually we're going to have to exit the company, and that provides a significant amount of risk. So that's another bit of risk profile that we have to look at. What are some other things that you look at, Walker, when it comes to analyzing a risk profile of the company itself? What are some things that you put in the pro bucket versus the con bucket?
Yeah. Number one, I think the thing that most first time buyers get wrong is that we like to put businesses kind of in a box. And then sort of we play this game pretend where we're going to remove the head of this animal and then put our own head on, I guess, after we buy it. Right. In other words, first time buyers go deep into analysis. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I think there's sort of like a learning curve that has to happen. But the truth is that when you buy that company, everything that happened up until then is only sort of directionally important in terms of what's going to happen moving forward. And it really is up to you as the new owner in terms of what's going to happen with that business. And I think that, I mean, we can use Porter's Five Forces and all these sort of other things to kind of like analyze businesses, which I do. I love Porter's Five Forces. Like my MBA fellow grads are like, "You don't really use that, do you?" I'm like, every day. We're like, where's the power? Where's the imbalance in this?
Just real quick for the listeners who don't know the five
Yeah,
forces: competitive rivalry, supplier power, buyer power, threat of substitution, and the threat of a
substitution.
new entry.
But, it's one of these where I use that pretty much right off the bat. But the thing is that, like, in this particular case, I think that it wouldn't be the fact that I'm buying one business, right, instead of 10 businesses. It would be the fact that I have hopefully 100 customers. And so if I lose one customer, right, then I'm looking for more customers. But I think that market theory kind of suggests, listen, if you want to de-risk anything, you need to diversify,
Mhm.
right? That's like literally what market theory says. I can put 100% of my savings in Apple stock, or my financial planner says, Walker, don't do that. That's crazy. Like just to divide it by 4% and all these different things. And the thing is, there's actually a financial advisor named Michael Kitces who wrote this wonderful article. But he said he basically did a study of how really rich people get really rich. Okay. And the answer is concentration, not diversification, right? In other words, it's people that build redwoods rather than bushes. And bushes are the sort of like I go to work, I have a W-2, I save 10 or 20% of my paycheck for my entire career and put it in the stock market or whatever, right? And whereas a redwood is like if I get a dollar, I'm putting it back in my business. Or if I have an opportunity to take chips off the table, I maybe take a little bit to survive, but I want to keep as much in the redwood as I can. And it grows all the way before it starts to branch out. Branching out being diversification in this
Yeah.
example. Okay. And so the concept here is that like when you buy a business, you're concentrated. You're not diversified. Okay. And there's a new trend going on right now. Marketing has sort of, I think, introduced a ton of risk around this space right now. There's a lot of really weird marketing going on, like buy a business with no money out of pocket. That's going to be unattainable for 99% of people who hear that for the first time. Okay. Number two is like buy a business, put a manager in, and don't go to work. That's a terrible idea. Okay. Number three is this concept of start a holding company and run out and buy, 24 businesses in a year. And I'm just like, when I got to six, my head was going to explode. And I had three verticals. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, they have like one company. They don't have like 20. Like just
Mhm.
get one.
Mhm.
So where I'm going with this is that the risk is that you can't diversify. You have to centralize and focus. So I guess it's like Warren Buffett, put all your eggs in one basket and watch that thing like a hawk, right? The risk, like so many, especially first time buyers, we really try to de risk the acquisition. And what I would tell you, Charles, is that the magic of an acquisition is not in the de risking, it's in what you're going to do with it after you acquire this asset.
Mhm.
Okay. And as a result, I feel that the risk is not in necessarily in the business that you're buying. And so I think a lot of times brokers get this wrong too. Like if they talk to brokers, they're like, "Oh, Charles, you want to buy a business? Okay, what'd you do before?" And they try to figure out like what you're all about, and then they try to match it with a business. It's like, no, that's completely wrong. You need to understand what it is that you bring to the table. And it's not what industry you're in. Like you might be a great salesperson and then eventually got promoted to sales manager and then you destroyed the whole sales team. But the point is like you need to figure out what you're good at. And then you need to marry it with a growth opportunity of the business that you're buying. My dad always said growing up that revenue solves a lot of problems. I think that's amazingly true in this space. So, the things that really de-risk for me are also not that exciting. So, for example, another big trend right now is like buy boring businesses, right? When I bought a book printing company, it was my first company I bought. It was unsexy, but if it was boring to go to work, I would have hated it. Like I don't really embrace the boring thing. It's more like the boring situation is laundromats. And it's like, hey, let's go and buy laundromats. Just these sort of like steady cash flowing businesses, right? But the concept here is that it's very low growth. So when we go back to the appreciation conversation we were just having, entrepreneurs, we're driven individuals, Charles, right? I mean, you hang out with them all the time. Like, I don't want to buy a laundromat and try to get it from, 700,000 in revenue to 7 and 10. I could care less,
Mhm.
right? I want to go buy something that's doing at least $1 million in revenue because 4% of companies achieve $1 million in revenue or more. So the concept is like, if you buy a business doing 1 million in revenue and it's got healthy margins, and you can kind of, look at all these other things and then look in the mirror and say, do I feel good at a cocktail party when I tell people what I do, if this is my company? And do I feel like I have what it takes to actually take this business to the next level? That's how you de-risk an acquisition,
Sure.
right?
You're right. And I think risk has multiple different buckets. Porter's five forces. There's, you talked about a falling knife. Businesses don't fail because of a lack of a good idea. They don't succeed because of a good idea. They succeed and fail arguably because of momentum being the most important factor. And so if momentum is moving up, in other words, the company has been growing, even if it's just slowly growing year after year, momentum is moving in the right direction. But if it's failing and falling, those are typically businesses that I'm going to stay away from. I know there's a lot of people that really like to do turnarounds and so forth, but it is going to require capital. And, you are dealing with a falling knife. You are going to have to be that much better, exponentially better. And most people underestimate how good they have to be in order to take a failing business and turn it around and become a successful business.
Completely agree with that.
But, then if we're looking at using a business to grow our existing operation, some of the questions that we're going to be asking ourselves would be, who has momentum that my business could currently benefit from? So, maybe they've tapped into other channels, other verticals. Perhaps they have partnerships that they've already engaged with that, again, that you could benefit as well. There's so many different things that we can look at where how do I plug this into an existing opportunity in my business? The way I look at it is almost like a zipper. When you look at the zipper, there's going to be strengths and there's going to be weaknesses. Where can you tie an existing operation into your business like a zipper and collectively make yourself stronger? Let's kind of move on from the risk side of things. I know a lot of people who have decided that they want to buy a business. Their next question is going to be, well, how do I find a business?
Ah,
Now, a business broker is going to be the most obvious source for getting a business. But talk to me about, like, is that really going to be the best way to do it? And if I do choose to go through a business broker, what are the best tips, strategies, and advice for going down that channel?
when I'm looking at a business and I'm evaluating it, I'll look at revenue and earnings because obviously those are the ones that are the fundamental drivers of value for any
Yeah.
business, right?
Yeah.
Number two is sort of transferability of the business itself. Like, in other words, is there a bunch of specialized knowledge or is there customer contracts or not? All these things. Number three is the business risks, okay, that we sort of started to talk about with Porter's Five Forces. Next is documentation. So, do they have good financials? Do they have standard operating procedures and all that stuff? And the last one is just what natural or growth opportunities does the business have in term around momentum. By the way, I love what you said about momentum being the most important factor. I think I'm going to steal that and write a whole keynote. That's awesome. I never thought about it like that. And your big question was, how do we find businesses to buy?
Yeah.
And I think that people like entrepreneurs that have a current company, okay, it's gonna happen slower because it's a smaller pond. It's not like I can just buy whatever, right? But the truth is that you're often already in the industry of the other potential sellers, right?
Yeah.
So if you go to conferences in your industry and you start to say like, yeah, I'm looking for, I want to do acquisitions and all this kind of stuff. I want to start buying other people in my industry. It'll take a little while, but then all of a sudden it'll break and you'll get one and then you'll get two. And then ultimately you become the person that people go to when they want to sell their business. The point is that if you have a current company that is already profitable and you don't even need the earnings from the company that you're buying, you can buy that company with like up to 90% leverage and you can pay off that loan in like 3 or 4 years. Just think about it like if you buy a rental property and you just put a little money down and buy it and then you hold it for like 25 years or whatever the loan is, these days. And then, at the end, you're like, okay, well, now I own this thing. So I'm going to go sell it. Then you extract the cash from the equity buildup, right? So, I mean, you can buy this thing with a loan, pay that off so quickly. And now that goes right onto your balance sheet, right? So it's impressively fast way. So when I meet Charles with people and they'd be like, look, I'm just stuck. Like, I need to meet with you. I'd be like, great, let's do it. I'd sit down and I'd start asking questions. And inevitably, the most common thing was this: it was like, oh, well, you don't use brokers. Like, I need to find an off market deal. Right.
Mm.
And I would say to them, okay, got it. So a lot of times we burn an immense amount of fuel trying to find that off market deal. Okay. Because they happen. And when they do, it can be a great deal. Okay. And those are the ones that we hear about, right? It's like, oh, yeah, I have a friend actually who his CPA called him and said, listen, I have a client's widow in here and he just died in his Porsche convertible and he has a business and we need someone to buy it. And I think that you'd be a great candidate. And he bought the business. These happen, right? These happen. And when we hear them, it's like, wow. But the thing is like, here's the deal. I started my first search in 2004. Okay. So I closed on my first business in 2006 and I had to sort of figure it all out. But the thing is like, I tell them, look, go to the brokers, right? In almost 20 years, I've actually never closed an off market deal. But the big thing, number one, when you are going to sell your business, the odds that it is the single most valuable thing that you have as a business owner is like 100%, right? It's like the most valuable thing. I don't know why people are so obsessed with this because it's like you're looking for, death, disability, drugs, disease, divorce, whatever the D's are, right? And so in those situations where you've got a seller with an unexpected situation and they need to fire sale their company, sure, you might get a deal. Okay. But the point is like when I tried to sell my distribution company in Springfield, Missouri, I'm literally looking for someone within a 90-mile radius of Springfield, Missouri, who knows about buying businesses, who has enough money to do a transaction of that size, and who wants to buy my company specifically.
Yeah.
It's a thin market, right? And whenever I sell a bricks and mortar company of my own, it often takes a year to get it done, right? I also work as a broker, okay? So I started helping people exit. And what I'll tell you, Charles, is that the first thing I realized was that I'll spend between, 6 and 24 months talking with sellers before they're actually ready.
Mhm.
They want to learn about the market, they want to learn about like how they package their business together. They want to kind of know like what the value of their business is and like I rarely say exactly the number that's in their head. And very rarely is it higher because it's like this is a market and you're looking for Charles is going to buy your company and like he can't build a portfolio. He's going to buy yours. Like it's risky and like there's all these
Right.
things. And so they sell at lower multiples. So I think that, working with brokers, number one, you get the benefit of the sellers that are ready. Number two, you get the sellers that have some kind of education on the small, lower middle market and the private capital markets and what they're actually going to get. So that's the other thing is when you are working one on one with a business owner and you're trying to buy their company, when they want a 10x and you know that businesses sell at like around, I don't know, a 3 to 3.5 times earnings in this segment, you have everything to gain by educating them. So why on earth are they going to believe you? That's been my story over and over and over, right? So they need to go to the broker, they need to have those conversations. And if you can be the first one or like super early in terms of getting that listing from a broker, the broker just spent 12 months working with this person,
Yeah.
right? So you get all the benefits of this stuff. And a lot of times in the acquisition lab, people will say, Walker, what do you think I should offer on this company? I really want to buy it, right? I'll be like, okay, well, Is there a list price on the business? $1 million. And I'm like, okay, how do you feel about $1 million? And they're like, well, I just, I looked at some comps and like, I feel like, I maybe should be able to get it for a little bit less. And I'm like, try. But if another buyer comes in and just pays the guy what he wants, he's going to get it. So you're looking at a business that's maybe listed at a 3.2 times earnings. That's 3.2 years that you're paying. Okay.
Yeah.
Why are you so hung up on lowering the purchase price by zero point 0.3 of a year? That's like 4 months of earnings. Like, get over it. Give the seller what they want. Get in there and get to work and grow the business. That's how you do it.
Got it, man. Awesome. So there's so much that we could cover on this topic. We very literally could spend hours discussing this. But this is a Beyond Seven Figures podcast. If there was one big tip that we could leave our readers with, your biggest, best tip for taking companies beyond seven figures, what would that be?
Well, I mean, Charles, it's hidden in plain sight, right? Like, you look at acquisition and the lever that it has to just add significant growth to your company so fast is undeniable, right? And the thing that's really interesting, I gave a talk recently and I was like, I wonder what would happen if I looked at, all the companies that we think of as being acquisition companies, and we look at all the companies that we think of as being innovative, right?
Mhm.
So I sort of looked at, over here you've got kind of Blackstone, and then over here it was one of the most innovative companies I can think of, right? So it's like Apple, Microsoft, all these things. All of them have acquired substantially more companies than the ones that we think of as being the acquisitions. Like, Elon Musk like bought Twitter, right? You know what I'm saying? But we think of Elon Musk as this sort of like, Steve Jobs kind of level person. The point is that he acquired Tesla. He did not start it. He bought it. Okay. But the point is that acquisition is equally as important as innovation. And I think as an entrepreneur, you just need to figure out, like, which direction do I need to go now?
Yeah, right. People want to learn more about you and the work that you do. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about, buy then build. And so it is really a great book. I don't just say this
Thanks, Charles.
because, I consider you a friend and a
It's
great
actually the best book my mother has ever read. So you're
yeah.
not alone.
It really is a great book. I encourage
Thank
everybody
you.
to pick it up and read it. But if they want to learn more about you and the work that you do, where do we send them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, buythenbuild.com. It's kind of home base. There's a bunch of free resources on there. I've got a YouTube channel with 100 videos, just free. Positionlab.com is my program. And, for any online entrepreneurs looking for, high quality deal flow, I partnered with Quiet Light to broker deals. And so I'm somewhat active over there as well.
Awesome. Very
Yeah.
cool. All right, my man. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. For more tips, strategies, and information on growing and scaling your business, remember to check us out over at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. And do yourself a favor, go grab Buy Then Build by Walker Deibel. Check out buythenbuild.com and Acquisition Lab and all those other resources that he has available. Growing a business is really a valuable strategy for growing and scaling your current operations. So put that, that feather in your hat, use that as a potential strategy. Again, this wraps up today's episode. This is Charles Gaudet with my friend Walker Deibel, and I will see you in another episode.